Hello, welcome back. As you probably already know, my name is Lorrie, and this is my Bible study. I am currently studying the book of John, and I felt compelled to share it with the world. So here I am. I am by no means a Bible scholar or a Bible expert. This is the first time I've ever studied the book of John. I am following the Grace Notes that were supplied through Grace Notes. They were written by Bible scholars. This was written by Daniel Hill, who has a PhD in religion, and he really knows what he's talking about. So I take no credit for the wisdom that comes from these, but I hope that you get as much out of these lessons or this lesson today as I do. We're in John chapter 3. So let me just turn this on and hide my face. Uh-oh, there it is. Okay, so we're going to start kind of right where we left off the other day. So confusion, too often a state in which many of us find ourselves. That has never been more true. Confusion is based upon not understanding what is going on. The only way out of confusion is to understand, and the only way to understand is to seek the truth. If truth remains absent, confusion will lead to controversy. Controversy will lead to criticism, and criticism will lead to division. The account before us could be entitled Confusion in the Camp, or more accurately, Camps. At this time, both John the Baptist and Jesus, with their disciples, were preaching in Judea. We can only imagine what it was like to live at that time and hear the word of truth proclaimed by two of the most powerful communicators who ever lived. I am sure that Judea was alive with excitement because the word of God was being put forth with such intensity and power. But in the midst of this, we see that there is going to be some confusion. A confusion that comes from an inability to think beyond that which is familiar. A confusion that will only be resolved when individuals begin to look beyond the subjective self and to the objective grace of God. John chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. These verses provide the background of these events. After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and there he was spending time with them and baptizing. And John also was baptizing in Aenon near Salim, because there was much water there, and they were coming and were being baptized. For John had not yet been thrown into prison. Okay, a few observations. While it tells us here that Jesus was baptizing, John chapter 4, verse 2 tells us that it was actually his disciples who were baptizing. John chapter 4, verse 2 says Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were. With both John and Jesus and their disciples in Judea, there was an overlap of ministry. This, however, was a cooperative effort, not a conflicting effort. The message was the same. Both John and Jesus preached a message of the kingdom and the king who had come from heaven to earth. It is also interesting to see that John was at a specific place because there was much water. Baptism was by immersion. It doesn't take much water to sprinkle or pour. This baptism was the baptism of the kingdom. There are 7 baptisms mentioned in the Bible, and each one has to do with identification. In the baptism of the kingdom, water represents the kingdom, and the believer being baptized identifies with the promised messianic kingdom. In the case of those who were baptized by the disciples of Jesus, they were also identified with the king, Jesus himself. Because of the different baptisms, and because of the different ways water was used in purification rituals for Israel, some confusion developed. John chapter 3, verse 25. There arose, therefore, a discussion on the part of John's disciples with a Jew about purification. The word discussion refers to a question or an inquiry that comes from being perplexed and can lead to debate. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 23, such questions are said to lead to arguments. And in Titus chapter 3, verse 9, they are said to be worthless. We are told here that the one who came to John's disciples was a Jew with questions about purification. Purification refers to the Jewish custom of purification that was mentioned in John chapter 2, verse 6. To the Jews, purification, which had a limited application in Old Testament law, had become a very involved practice by the time of John and Jesus. Although purification was practiced daily prior to eating and at weddings and other events, the most significant form of purification occurred when a Gentile became a religious Jew. It is in this Jewish conversion purification that brought up the issue of baptism. Not only did this confusion result in a debate between this Jew and John's disciples, it brought confusion to the whole issue of what Jesus and his disciples were doing. John chapter 3, verse 26. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you have borne witness, behold, he is baptizing, and all are coming to him. Now from this statement we can determine a little more of what took place in verse 25 with the debate over baptism and purification. The debate centered on the meaning of baptism as it compares to the Jewish custom of conversion washings or purification. The debate brought up John's baptism and Jesus' baptism, which led to some questions for John's disciples. The disciples of John then came to John and questioned him regarding what Jesus and his disciples were doing. What is expressed in this verse is confusion, to be sure, but worse, it's the beginning of division. The disciples of John are expressing doubt and confusion at this time, but could easily move to antagonism, disagreement, and division with Jesus and his disciples. The confusion is caused by subjectivity. Let's examine that for a moment. The Jew who came questioning John's disciples did so trying to understand something that was new in light of something that was old. He was closed-minded, locked into the ritual of Israel, and could not see the point in baptism. For him, baptism was for the Gentiles. Why would John and Jesus baptize Jews? So he combined his inability to understand something that was new with his inability to see the need for a Jew to be baptized, and the result was subjective ignorance. But this did not end just with him. John's disciples understood baptism and why a Jew would be baptized to be identified with the kingdom, but they became subjective regarding Jesus and Jesus' disciples. This led to the question of verse 26, which includes their subjective arrogance. But it doesn't end there. Notice the last statement of verse 26, and all the men are coming to him. These disciples, having seen the popularity of John decrease, were on the edge of jealousy, and that is hinted at in their question. All it would have taken for John to say one negative thing about Jesus, and these disciples would have been on a campaign against the Lord and his disciples, and a full division would have occurred. Instead, this move toward division is going to be halted in its tracks by the teaching of truth. Truth dispels the arrogance of ignorance, but you have to listen to it, learn it, think it, and apply it. This near disaster developed because of 7 things: ignorance that would not give way to enlightenment, tradition that would not give way to truth, subjectivity that would not give way to objectivity, doubt that would not give way to understanding, jealousy that would not give way to joy, competition that would not give way to cooperation, and the present problem eclipsing what had already been taught and explained. John chapter 3, verses 27 to 30, contain John's answer to his disciples. John gave 4 principles that should dispel the move towards further subjectivity and division on the part of his disciples. 4 principles that were as timely for us as they were for him. Whatever you have is grace. John chapter 1. So these are the 4 principles. 1. Whatever you have is grace. John chapter 3, verse 27. John answered and said, "A man can receive nothing unless it has been given him from heaven." John deals with the greater problem first, the accusation that all men are following Jesus rather than John, and the jealousy that is expressed by that statement is a real problem. John recognized that any popularity he may have enjoyed was grace. The ones who followed him were grace. The disciples he was speaking to were grace. And we cannot be jealous over grace. God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Number 2, remember what we have been taught. John chapter 3, verse 28. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. John had taught his disciples who he was, what his purpose was. He was not the promised Messiah, and that his sole purpose was to prepare the way for the Lord Jesus Christ. This was basic to John's ministry and message. His disciples had forgotten this, and so often we forget some basic doctrine, and that opens the door for subjective ignorance. His disciples spoke, complained, criticized, and expressed their jealousy before they thought and remember what they had been taught. They needed to be slow to speak and quick to think, to remember basic doctrines. Number 3, the third principle is that joy can be found in others. John chapter 3, verse 29. He who has the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice, and so this joy of mine has been made full. Well, the analogy is exact because Jesus is the bridegroom, and those who are his bride. The principle is much broader and can be applied to us and others today. What kind of a wedding would it be if the best man walked around with a long face, complaining that the groom was marrying the bride? What would it be like if the best man was jealous? Instead, the friend of the groom rejoices. John takes this one step further. Therefore, my joy has been fulfilled to overflowing. As a perfect tense, the meaning is fulfilled in the past and remains full in the present. Passive voice. He received this filling up of joy, did not earn it or deserve it. The passive voice is the voice of grace. We can find great joy when we see the plan of God revealed in the lives and ministries of others, and that joy removes jealousy. And number 4, we must put others first. John chapter 3, verse 30. He must increase, but I must decrease. John's disciples were upset that so many were following Jesus, but that was the way it should be. John was to decrease, and Jesus was to increase in followers, in disciples, in influence, in ministry. This is the challenge we have in Philippians 2. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. And we think of others when we rejoice in the success of others, in their ministries, in their spiritual advance. When we see others increase, we can set aside subjectivity and jealousy and pettiness. It is by means of truth taught, truth learned, truth remembered and truth applied, that division and jealousy is dispelled. It is the truth that sets free from confusion and all that can follow in confusion's path. And that's 15 minutes. Do we dare keep going? No, we better not. There's a lot coming up here. We better stop there. Okay, let me flip this off so I'm not teasing you with what's coming next. I would like to keep going, but I know that we don't want these lessons to get too long. They'll get to, if you guys want me to go a little longer, say something in the comments when you watch this video. I can aim for, I'm trying to keep them between 15 and 20 minutes, but I could go 20 to 25 minutes if you guys think that would be okay. Or let me know if you like this length. They're short, to the point, and yeah, it gives you enough information to digest it and really think about it, I think. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm so thankful that you're here, and I'm so thankful that you're sharing in this learning with me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Take care of yourself. Bye now.